Imagine a future where humanity simply never returns to Earth. A future where we totally stop treating space as just some destination for brief, daring missions, and instead we actually claim it as a permanent home. Picture generations born, raised, and growing old entirely in orbit, living out their whole lives without ever once walking under an open sky. It's a concept that is, quite frankly, awe-inspiring and maybe a little bit terrifying. Today, in this explainer, we're going to unpack exactly what it would take biologically, culturally, and politically to make that permanent leap into the cosmos. I want you to really envision this massive evolutionary shift. We aren't just talking about a 6-month stint on a space station where astronauts are practically counting down the days until they can feel the sun on their faces again. No, we are talking about forever. That means humanity having to engineer literally every single aspect of survival. It means children being born who will only ever know gravity as a rotational force. It basically means redefining our entire species. Just take a second to really soak in that idea. On Earth, we're so grounded by things like the smell of a forest after it rains, the sound of thunder, or the warmth of genuine sunlight coming through a window. Now contrast that deep, built-in familiarity with the engineered reality of orbit. Imagine your whole life unfolding inside a structure that never actually touches dirt. Your home, your school, your hospital, and maybe even your grave are just suspended out there in the void, with Earth reduced to this beautiful blue sphere that you can only ever stare at from a distance. Okay, let's dive right into this. Section 1, the fragile experiment. From visiting to staying. This kind of monumental shift doesn't just suddenly start with some sprawling galactic empire. It begins with a really small station and an incredibly tightly controlled environment. Because there's a fundamental difference between short-term survival and long-term existence. Visiting space means you get to rely on resupply ships and mission control. But staying forever, that means cutting the cord completely. Every single human weakness gets magnified in the void. You can't just call down to Earth for extra water, right? Your infrastructure absolutely cannot fail. Moving on to Section 2, engineering human survival, or the closed-loop world. The fundamental rule of this new frontier is brutally simple. Space does not forgive mistakes. There is no wilderness right outside your door to rescue you if things go wrong. Think about the sheer, staggering complexity of the life support required to just sustain us. Air isn't just air anymore, and water isn't just water. Every single breath you take has to be produced and recycled. You've got radiation shielding, thermal control, completely redundant energy systems. One major breakdown doesn't just mean you're having a bad day, it literally ends everything. And this whole closed-loop concept, it applies to what we eat too. Down on Earth, our harvests are intimately tied to soil, the weather, the seasons. Up in space, food becomes pure engineering. We're talking relying on hydroponics, algae reactors, and synthetic proteins. Think about having a birthday dinner in orbit. It carries the exact same emotional weight as it does on Earth, but the feast itself, it's going to utilize entirely synthesized or lab-grown ingredients, perfectly optimized for zero waste. Which brings us to Section 3, the biological divide, gravity and the human body. See, we aren't just engineering our environment. Our environment is inevitably going to re-engineer us. Without Earth's constant, steady pull, how does the human form actually change? Well, step 1 is the arrival of the Earthborn pioneers. But by step 2, relying heavily on rotating habitats for artificial gravity, the body begins to adapt. Bones start to weaken, balance systems fundamentally change. And this brilliantly illustrates what happens over time in step 3. Children born in these habitats develop totally different coordination and biological needs, essentially creating a brand new space-adapted branch of humanity. Next up, Section 4, culture in the void, life in a sealed world. Once the physical body adapts, the mind has to follow. The human mind must be actively kept from feeling like it's trapped in a beautiful cage. Consider the micro-narrative of a space-born childhood. An Earth childhood is defined by the elements, wind, rain, the soil beneath your feet. But for the very first generation born in space, their entire universe is defined by walls, screens, and a structural sky. Imagine being a kid looking out a reinforced window and realizing that Earth is just this glowing marble out in the distance. That realization shapes a completely new emotional map of the universe. So everyday life is going to transform to build an entirely new culture. Holidays wouldn't be tied to Earth's seasons anymore. They'd be tied to orbital cycles or, say, habitat anniversaries. Language would develop entirely new idioms for enclosure and shared survival. And to make all of this actually work, Psychologists, artists, philosophers, and storytellers become literally just as vital as the engineers. They're the ones who will build a vibrant, meaningful culture within these sealed walls, ensuring space civilization is its own distinct world.
All right, Section 5, the politics of danger, power and vulnerability.
So the crucial point here is that a sealed world with a distinct culture doesn't automatically mean you're living in a utopia. The extreme conditions would vastly intensify human politics. When your very survival is fully engineered, power becomes incredibly concentrated. Think about the terrifying fragility of this system. Whoever controls the air filtration, the water recycling, and the energy, they effectively control the people. Governance and rights take on a whole new level of urgency when one single bad political decision can threaten the lives of absolutely everyone aboard. We're looking at a crazy dual reality for these orbital city-states. On one hand, you have the potential for incredible economic abundance, mining asteroids, harnessing unfiltered solar energy, and manufacturing goods in microgravity. But on the other hand, space becomes a domain of immense strategic vulnerability. Sabotage, a high-speed orbital collision, or a catastrophic power failure isn't just a property damage issue. It is an instant, unmitigated life-or-death crisis for everyone. It demands extreme vigilance because there's no backup planet waiting nearby to catch you if you fall.
And that leads us into our final phase, Section 6, a new kind of human, evolving beyond Earth. Facing that kind of constant existential pressure changes a society, ultimately altering our relationship with mortality itself. Earth's meaning would completely transform. It would essentially become a mythical cradle world, an ancestral homeland, or maybe a heavily protected heritage site. Future generations might visit it the exact same way we visit ancient ruins today. They'd respect it deeply, maybe even more precisely because they lost the ability to live there effortlessly, but it would no longer be the center of their daily human life. Instead, their actual daily life is going to be defined by intense engineering and extreme environments. A spacefaring society would have to be obsessed with prevention and maintenance. Every single bolt and oxygen seal matters. But, this immense pressure also forges incredibly strong bonds. It makes people inherently more disciplined and cooperative. When your air supply is literally shared with your neighbor, the importance of community isn't some abstract concept anymore, it's a physical reality. In space, nobody floats alone for long. But despite all those massive risks, the politics, and the sheer difficulty of it all, there is a massive payoff. Living in space forever acts as the ultimate insurance policy for our civilization. By transitioning to a multi-world species, we are no longer at the mercy of a single planetary disaster, whether that happens to be an asteroid, a total climate collapse, or a supervolcano. It grants humanity options. It basically ensures that the entire story of our species isn't wiped out in a single unlucky stroke. Which leaves us with this final, really profound question to consider. Can we actually survive in a harsh, unending void that offers zero margin for carelessness and yet still manage to carry forward the best parts of what makes us human? Can we remain compassionate, curious, and creative when every single day is an engineered fight for survival? It's not just a technical puzzle. It's the ultimate moral test for humanity. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and I'll leave you to ponder just how far we can actually go before we become something entirely new.